All right, we're going to get this meeting of Community Infrastructure Services started. We have one consent item with regards to on-street parking regulations for West Heights Drive. Does someone want to move that? Councillor Ioannidis, you have to... Yeah. Councillor Ioannidis, you need to bring forward a motion to ask questions on a consent item?
Yes.
And you do so?
Yes.
Okay. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Go ahead.
Yeah, my question is to, I guess, Ken is here. With regards to West Heights Drive, I just wanted to know, I know there were some residents that had contacted me and they had some concerns about the parking space. I'm wondering if those issues were resolved.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair, to the committee. When we sent out the notification of this survey, or of this, of this parking prohibition, we received one call, and it was from a resident who lives just a couple houses down on West Heights from Putnam Place, and the concern was that they get a number of personal service workers at the home and need parking out front. And our proposal still maintains parking in front of their home. It does remove it from the parking from the home beside them, but the parking in front of the home is still available to them.
Okay. That was all. Thank you.
Councillor Zola, you have a question on this item?
Yeah, I have a generic question. I asked for this some time ago. I received this and I couldn't really, the legend didn't mean anything to me because I couldn't read it. Is it not possible to get some colored charts periodically? If you're not going to do it in color, doing it like this in black and white, we're just wasting the paper.
I think part of it's the black and white because it's mass produced, but maybe there's an opportunity to, when there's maps like this, have them printed off separately so we have a better idea. I'll leave that with staff.
Duly noted. Thank you.
It's not, I think it's not just a concern from your maps, but other maps that we receive as well across the corporation. So if you can look at it from a transportation perspective, that'd be great, and others can pass the message along as well. Okay, so it's been moved by Councillor Fernandez. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Okay, we're now going to move on to item number 2, which is the Upper Blair Creek State of Watershed Report, and we are going to get a presentation from staff and delegation. Linda, did you want to introduce, or is Chris can go ahead. Welcome, Chris, and he's from Aquifer Beach Limited.
Thank you very much. Just want to take a few minutes to present on the State of the Watershed Report for the Upper Blair Creek study. Quick overview of the presentation. We want to review just study tasks, purpose, the objectives, some context as well for the study area, the completed monitoring, as well as the summary of the results, and want to touch on the development of the goals, targets, and objectives for the study. As part of our task for this study, began with the background review, the confirmation of the target indicators, data collection and management, data analysis, as well as reporting, and this was the scope of the project itself. The study purpose for Upper Blair is essentially to establish the baseline conditions. And this is key to this particular study, is the baseline conditions for the Upper Blair Creek watershed. And it's a synthesis of monitoring data that was performed by GRCA as well as the relevant developers as part of the pre-development monitoring for this area. And it's in keeping with the adaptive management approach, or AMA, that really was set out as part of earlier documents for this area, including the 1997, what we call the BBB study, and then as well as the 2009 functional drainage study. So this recommended that we not only monitor, but that we learn from the monitoring as we go. So it's just not enough to collect the data, but also to look at the data and see what it's telling us and then adjust the program as we move forward. And this particular report addresses the existing conditions and then how we adjust that going forward. So in terms of the objectives, obviously we are reviewing all the background reports and monitoring data was completed, a definition of the existing conditions of Upper Blair Creek, development of a framework moving forward for the project goals, objectives, indicators, and targets, which I'll touch on a little bit later, as well as evaluation of the existing conditions and development of specific targets, and finally, a recommendation for an integrated monitoring program going forward as well. So again, part of that adaptive management, how do we move forward with the data as we move through development into the during development and post-development phases. And then we also were tasked with making recommendations for erosion and sediment control during construction. And again, I'll touch on that as we go through the project here. So just in terms of study context, this is Upper Blair. The area that is hatched in is the area within the city of Kitchener that we're tasked with right here. This is the water course with the east and west study areas. And just to give some context as to what this water course looks like, we thought we'd just do a quick photo tour through the study area. So at the mouth, we have essentially this is at its widest point. Upper Blair has quite good structure features within it. Somewhat fast-moving water, but generally it's pretty slow all the way through the system, including at the mouth. And this is just upstream of the Grand River. As we move further upstream, some major crossings, lots of good boulder structures, lots of riffles. We see some oxygenation happening in this photograph here. As we move further up, we find these really small drainage features. So some of the tributaries that we see on the map look like this in the field. So these are extremely small headwater features that are feeding Upper Blair Creek throughout the water course. And again, just another example of a small tributary that would drain into Upper Blair. So these are extremely small in some cases. Some major infrastructure at major crossings. This is an example here. And we have very good riparian cover, lots of shading, lots of good vegetation, fairly clear water, not a lot of excessive erosion in the water course at present. Again, another major crossing. Again, you can see it's fairly narrow. This is about 2 meters wide. So fairly small in terms of water courses that we typically see in the city. And this is an important picture. I'd just like to pause here for a moment to take a look at this photo. One of the important things that we see here is the clarity of the water. So we can actually see the bed material from this photo from up on the road. So you can see the cobbles and sands within this system. And I'll touch on that as we go forward. But this is an important photo just to keep in mind as we go through the presentation. This is actually a monitoring station you can see on the right. This is as we head closer towards the western end of the watershed. And again, through more wetland features, very slow moving water. And then again, another crossing. But again, you start to see this transition into marsh type habitat. As I said, that one photo, we did look at the total suspended solids or the amount of sediment in the water. And when we talk about Upper Blair, these two photos here, the two jars on the left are actually the type of water quality we would expect in Upper Blair. This is what we saw from 2006 to present is this type of water quality. So essentially it's very clear water, very clean, very low suspended solids. So we have very little bit amount of sediment in that water course at present. In terms of the monitoring, monitoring has been underway since 2006 in the Upper Blair watershed. It's been undertaken by the Grand River Conservation Authority as well as 3 of the 4 developers. So 2006, 2007 is the monitoring data. The primary goal of this particular report and study is to monitor and evaluate the health of the Upper Blair Creek ecosystem. And the secondary goal is to monitor development from pre to post construction to ensure that there's no negative impacts that occur. In terms of summary results, you see a big difference in base flow being the water that's entering the stream after it rains, not during an event. So if we're at New Dundee Road, it's only about 8% of the total flow, but as we go down to Dickey Settlement, it's about 41% of the total flow. So this indicates that we have groundwater reaching the water course at different locations, so spatially along the water course. So it's a cool to cold water stream, depending on where we are in that water course. We do have a brook trout population within there, all the way from the mouth of the river to the Dodge Drive tributary. And there's one spawning area that currently exists in the Upper Blair Creek watershed. There are significant surface and groundwater interactions in this area, particularly in the wetland tributary areas, both north and south of Blair Creek at the Roseville Swamp. So we have a lot of groundwater entering the system, which would link up to those first points in terms of brook trout and base flow. And we have fair to good ecological conditions throughout the water course. In terms of water quality, which is generally a question we get asked quite a bit, so we thought we would spend a moment here to look at the water quality and just look at it graphically. So at this point upstream, we have very good water quality. As we move further down, to the Dodge Drive tributary. We have poor water quality at that point in the watercourse. Downstream of the Roseville Swamp, we have, again, poor water quality. At the 401, we return to good water quality. So this is that base flow and groundwater recharge entering the watercourse. And then all the way from 401 to the Grand River, we have, again, good water quality through that reach as well. So this is the existing conditions in terms of results and water quality for Upper Blair Creek. So in terms of the report itself, it is a comprehensive document. It's about 500 pages with about 1,000 pages of appendices, as well as numerous Excel sheets and data analysis that went along with it. The report is broken into major disciplines: surface water quality, surface water quantity, quality, groundwater, stream morphology, so the shape of the watercourse, the condition of the watercourse, terrestrial ecology, as well as aquatic ecology. So each major discipline is covered in the report. One of the key things that has been done as part of defining existing conditions for Upper Blair is the development of goals, objectives, and targets for each of those different disciplines for a multiple of different parameters. So in terms of the goals that we have set, the environmental goals are broad aims associated with preserving a specific associated feature or function in the watercourse. So it's important that we identify these very, very early. So we have 3 major goals for the Upper Blair Creek watershed: to restore and protect the surface water quality, surface water quantity, and associated aquatic resources; to protect and restore the groundwater quantity and quality; and to conserve, protect, and restore the natural aquatic, wetland, woodland, and wildlife habitats as part of this area. In terms of the objectives, these are qualitative components necessary to meet the objectives. We have 3 interrelated goals and a total of 13 environmental objectives developed for each of those disciplines that we mentioned. And then we also have targets. So these are indicators, parameters, and targets. And it's a piece of information. So this is a detailed piece or a clue, attribute of the ecosystem that we can point to say that this is an outcome or a potential impact going forward. So we set all of these things in the report so we know where we came from so that we can move forward and assess it in the during development and post-development phases. So this is a measurable parameter, and this is the key to setting the conditions for the existing conditions report. So the targets are specific aims that will be achieved in the future, and the targets are associated with a measurable parameter that we have set values for in the report. In terms of the outcomes, we've developed a detailed monitoring plan, which is aimed at maintaining status quo. We've had monitoring plan recommendations and modifications as well. We've made recommendations for improved sediment management during construction. And we've also reviewed the Rapid Assessment and Action Protocols, or RAPS, for both temperature and erosion sediment control during construction. And again, to preserve that existing conditions. And with that, I will take some questions.
That is great. Thank you very much for your presentation. First, we have Councillor Fernandez.
Thanks, Chris. And you made this presentation to the Environmental Committee, and there were lots and lots of questions. And this is, the majority of this is in my area, in my ward. If you wouldn't mind going back to the picture of where you showed how clear the water was out of that one location.
Certainly.
Nope, there. That's right. Are you able to identify for us or where that is? You've got BL1, BL2, and 3. Where is this on the map?
That photo there, let me just go back one. So that's right at the confluence of the Roseville tributary through the swamp to the Upper Blair main channel.
Okay. So, and the water is going from the Grand.
This picture is taking, this is on Upper Blair itself, heading towards the 401 crossing.
Okay, all right. You also mentioned something about Dodge Drive and a tributary there. And did you say that's where the water was still good quality, or was it bordering on poor? Through
the chair, at the Dodge Drive tributary, we do have poor water quality in the existing conditions. And I will point out that it's not necessarily indicative of poor habitat. It is a slower moving water course. There are more nutrients, more deposition, so it may not have necessarily oxygenation or the cooler temperatures that would make other sections have better water quality. But that, in the existing conditions, that section has poor, lesser water quality than the main branch of Upper Blair.
Okay. So my concerns have always been around Blair Creek, that the intensity of the development, and I know that much of that development was decided through an OMB appeal, but now we're seeing some requests, or I am receiving some requests for further intensification, especially around Dodge Drive and adjacent to Blair Creek. How can we forestall the dramatic change that I suspect is going to happen, especially if we have a winter like this, where you've got your freezing, your thawing, you've got your warm weather. Now we've got a ton of rain, and all of that runoff off the impervious cover is going to affect the creek.
Through the chair, what's important here is to acknowledge that this is existing conditions. And one of the objectives of the monitoring report is to quantify those existing conditions such that we can attempt to maintain the status quo or maintain what's there now. So that poor water quality, yes, it could be enhanced, but the habitat has developed in that area for that particular water quality regime, flow regime. There are impacts to development, but the planning process that's been put in place through the subwatershed studies as well as the functional drainage study has set pretty stringent targets on things like water quality, quantity control, as well as infiltration, acknowledging that really important link between surface and groundwater in this area. So the infiltration targets for that entire Upper Blair development have been set, and there are some contingencies in place as part of development, which we reviewed in the report, which include the provision of extra lots to be used as infiltration facilities should not be demonstrated that there's no impacts to the water course. So the subdivision agreements do have that provision in them to allow for additional infiltration facilities to be brought online if impacts are identified during the subsequent phases of the Upper Blair State of the Watershed program.
Okay, thanks for the clarification. There was a lot of questions and concerns at the Environmental Committee, and therefore it's being brought back to the committee again. And certainly I don't want to delay the recommendation of accepting the report and having you guys continue to move forward. But should we maybe not be considering, maybe this is a question for staff, but considering the comments and the further questioning that's going to happen in the Environmental Committee before we accept this report any further?
We're currently on questions of delegation, so it's important that we have our consultant here and that we ask those questions, so I ask that you hold that question until it's time to ask questions of staff. There's been a fair bit of dumping that's been happening in the one wetland adjacent to the Blair Creek as it flows through the Stauffer Road and Rydell Road area. Is there an impact to the creek and the water quality?
Through the chair, sorry, could you repeat that?
There's been a significant amount of garbage dumping and that kind of thing happening along there. I'm always concerned about the salt, especially at that corner, the salt use. Are we seeing impacts on the creek because of that?
Through the chair, illegal dumping is always a concern in water courses. They've always historically been a place of placement of refuse. It happens all the time in all water courses across Ontario. Yes, that is a concern. It's something that would need to be managed. In terms of seeing impacts to the water course, again, this is only setting the existing conditions pre-development. This tells you where we are today. In terms of impacts, we will know as we continue to do the monitoring through the city and through the Grand River Conservation Authority if those indicator targets are changing and if they're changing outside of the normal range. So we expect a certain amount of variation, a certain amount of change as a natural process. This will identify if those changes are happening at a rate that is greater than we would expect in a natural condition.
And what would be our immediate response to that?
So there are provisions in the Upper Blair report on the frequency of monitoring stations, Again, we talked about the provisional infiltration facilities. There are the rapid response. So in this case, if there was a sediment release during construction, the city does hold certificates for the developers to ensure that they are maintaining the erosion sediment controls. There is a process to notify Grand River Conservation Authority as well as the city within 24 hours to ensure that remediative measures are taking place. So there are a series of checks and balances that have been set up, not just through this study, but through the past studies, the BBB and FDS, that have these response actions built into them so that we can respond quickly if there is an adverse impact that's detected.
I see my time was up. Thank you, Chris, and I look forward to seeing you again at the Environmental Committee. I have questions of staff after.
Thank you. Councillor Ioannidis?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Chris, for coming in. And one question I really have is basically you had the slide about the water clarity, and just to give me a high level. What's the difference between the sediment ones that are have more sediment and the ones that's clear? Because I don't know. I remember as a kid fishing, I was told that if the water was dirty, it means there's life and everything else. So this kind of is counter to that. So
sure. Through the chair, it all relates back to the existing ecosystem, aquatic and terrestrial ecosystem that's present. Brook trout are very sensitive to thermal impacts, so temperature as well as sediment. So we can actually get, with really high sediments, there could be impacts to fish gills. So it all depends on the type of fisheries that are within that water course. In this case, we do have a very low suspended solid system, so very little amount of sediment, very clean water, and very cool water. And if we look back to the functional drainage study report, we see that importance highlighted in the requirement for very large infiltration volumes to be targets to be in place as part of development. We're trying to get water back into the ground to maintain that existing flow to the water course so that the water is cool and clean before it reaches the water course.
Okay. Madam Chair, when time's appropriate, I'm prepared to move the recommendation.
Okay, Councillor Gazzola?
Yeah, I really don't know what I'm talking about. So, can you go back to that where you showed all the things of water? Are they all taken? It's an amazing picture. Are they all taken from the same watershed?
Those photos, through the chair, those photos are just representative to show you the different concentrations. We often hear reports saying the suspended sediment was 200, and it's very difficult for people to understand what 200 milligrams per liter looks like versus 2,000. And so this has just been prepared to show the concentration as just illustrative of what we would expect.
So we're on that further map when you said to the west there we have good water quality, and then you had an area in the center where it was poor water quality. What would the poor water quality look like?
Through the chair, most of the water quality, when we say poor water quality, is indicating two things. One, some of the chemical constituents that we're sampling, not necessarily sediment. It could be things like zinc, which is very common downstream of wetlands. We have high zinc concentrations. That could be outside the normal range and therefore make the water quality poor. The second thing is the actual, for simple terms, bugs that live in the sediment of the water course. They are a very good indicator of water quality. And so we can sample, and we did sample, we did look at the data of the sampling of those bugs in the water course. And it tells us whether they're tolerant or intolerant, whether they're used to good water quality and poor water quality, and we can make a judgment on the long-term water quality of that water course. So some of it's related to sediment, some of it's related to metals, nutrients, as well as we're also looking at the effect of the water quality in terms of the existing bugs in the sediment of that water course itself.
Okay, I can understand that you wouldn't want metals in that, but sediment, does that hurt anything?
We want to maintain the existing sediment regime. So the amount of sediment that is flowing down the water course now is the natural background that the water course and the aquatic ecology is adjusted to. We want to maintain that existing sediment. Excess sediment can not only change the form of the water course, but as well as the aquatic habitat. So it can be detrimental to a water course, particularly something like Upper Blair.
Thank you.
Councillor Yurnitzky?
Thank you for some of the answers that you provided to the questions that have been asked, and it's quite enlightening in terms of knowing good quality versus poor quality versus clear water versus a jar filled with sediment. When you mentioned that there's that certain area there that poor quality, and that may not be as a result of a lot of sediment, that water could be clear, is that correct?
That's correct.
So what would you need to do to improve the poor and make it good in that particular section?
Through the chair. In a lot of times we're just trying to maintain. So we're not necessarily, some of those sources of, say, zinc can be naturally occurring. In Kitchener, it's very common to have high levels of zinc downstream of wetland features. So as we have organic matter that's decomposing, we can release not only zinc, but as well as nutrients. That can lead to poor water quality in that section. But it's really important to look at the whole water course as a whole. Across the whole water course, we have generally good water quality. Some localized areas that we would classify as poor water quality, and those are typically areas that don't have the brook trout in it. They're not conducive to their habitat, so they don't go there. We would look to maintain existing conditions, and where we can, we want to improve the water quality, ensuring that there's not excess sediment, but we're not going to be able to necessarily remove the background sources of zinc.
So you indicated that using the zinc as one of the metals is downstream of the wetlands. What is the quality of the wetlands in the area? I mean, that ties in together, does it not?
It does, absolutely. Through the chair. Typically, in terms of wetlands, they are a specific eco-habitat all their own. They have their own species and their own hydro periods. The water quality can be extremely variable in wetlands. Typically, they do a lot of cleaning by themselves. They're trapping a lot of sediment, eating up a lot of nutrients as well. They will have typically poor water quality based on the standards that were used in this study. If we were to measure the water quality in a wetland, it would generally be poor.
Right. So to address the poor water quality, and it's coming from the wetlands, but the purpose of the wetlands is to leave them in their natural state and not do anything with them. So it's a Mother Nature sort of process, is it not?
Through the chair, yes, this is precisely it. The wetlands are functioning as they should. They remain intact. They provide an important function, not only for flow, but as well for water quality. They do a lot of cleaning of the water before it's discharged. So although it's poor, it is a relative scale. It could be very poor, extremely poor. We are still generally, again, on the water course, dealing with very good water quality.
Okay, so in that section that's poor, you might as well just leave it the way it is, because there's nothing much you can do about it.
Through the chair, that is exactly the existing conditions report is reporting what's there now with the intent of maintaining that in the future.
Right, and I appreciate that. What about development that would grow in the area with more new subdivisions, etc.? They would have their own stormwater management quality and quantity controls. Would that have an impact on the stream itself in the end, from your experience of other systems?
Through the chair, if we were to use two different examples, one being flow and one being, say, groundwater quality. Groundwater can take decades to recharge and to discharge, whereas flow can be almost instantaneous. So not only are we looking at the Upper Blair watercourse in terms of geographically, in terms of space, but as well as time. And that's reflected in the monitoring report. So some impacts will be very soon. Some could be 10 years out or more. So we would see erosion being a 20 to 50 year time period for those types of things to show up, versus benthic, the bugs, as we've talked about in the sediment of the creek, can be almost instantaneous. We can see changes in those in one season.
Right. Okay. Interesting in terms of the time range. Final question I have then. You mentioned that there's one spawning area for the trout in that. Whereabouts is that? Is that in the poor or a good quality area? And what do they prefer?
Yeah, it is in a good water quality area. It is downstream of the Roseville tributary. It is generally and almost exclusively associated with areas where groundwater is upwelling through gravelly sediments, and that is where brook trout spawn. So they lay their eggs in the gravel bars, and they're fed by the water, the cool water that's an oxygenated water that's circling through the gravel beds. One of the concerns with sediment is that it does plug up those gravel beds.
Okay, thank you very much. Great answers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. That's all the questions that we have for you. So questions of staff, Councillor Fernandez?
Yes, as I was alluding to, Chris, that some of the concern I have is the intensive development, and I know that there has been a request to intensify, especially around some of the Upper Blair Creek. What will we be doing for rapid response? Should there? I mean, once there's a sediment spill, as we know what happened in Strasburg Creek, that can be the demise of the brook trout habitat. So, how are we prepared to respond immediately to something like this?
Through the chair, the rapid response program for erosion sediment control is a bit of a two-pronged approach. The city has erosion sediment control inspectors that go out routinely to those subdivisions. They're also receiving weekly erosion sediment control reports from the developers detailing the erosion sediment controls that are in place, as well as if there's any breaches or any upgrades to their erosion sediment controls. That is a condition of the subdivision, which the city holds a bond to ensure that those erosion sediment controls are in place. Should the developer not maintain the erosion sediment controls, the city has the option to use the monies that they're held to maintain those erosion sediment controls on their behalf. They're also receiving reports after significant rainfall events, so there are inspections happening there as well. So that's the kind of day-to-day. The rapid response is the developer is required for within 24 hours to report a spill, in this case any kind of sediment released beyond the limits of development, to the city and the Grand River Conservation within 24 hours. And then that first mechanism that we talked about could then be enacted should it be required. Typically, the developers are very serious about erosion sediment control when they get an issue, and especially if it's reported.
Okay, great. My last question is again of staff, and I don't think you'll be able to answer this one, Chris, but how will the questions from the Environmental Committee, when we meet again, and we will go through a lot of the questions that they had unanswered, how will that affect the Blair Creek Watershed Report?
Linda?
Through the chair, we will be going back to Environmental Committee, I believe it's April 21st, to address any unanswered questions. Just due to timing constraints, it got cut short for us answering questions. So we'll be going back, staff, to answer any further questions that the committee has. But our recommendations still stand today in the report, with GRCA recommendations and support as well.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Yanetsky?
Yeah, same question, maybe slightly different to the time frame with this matter going to the committee, Environmental Committee, on April the 21st. So do I understand that there was not enough time frame to answer all the questions in the previous meeting? Is that the issue?
Linda?
Yeah, through the chair, we went to Environmental Committee on March 17th.
I'm sorry, I can't quite hear you. A little louder,
Through the
please.
chair, we went to Environmental Committee on March 17th, and just timing due to the committee got cut a little short. We answered the majority of the questions, but we were asked to come back to answer any further questions, so that's what we will be doing on April 21st.
Okay, so whatever happens there at the 21st meeting, and then this report goes to council for the 25th or 26th, whatever it is, the following
25th.
Monday?
Yep.
So at that council meeting, then any changes will be brought to our attention?
That would be correct. We don't anticipate any changes to the overall recommendations of this report.
Okay. So back to the recommendation, when I look at it, it talks about that the reporting time frame for the Upper Blair Creek, et cetera, and then I look at the report, and there's no time frames. Like I see no numbers or dates. Help me understand what you mean by time frames.
Through the chair, our commitment, our legislative requirement through the OMB is to provide an update at maximum every 5 years on the state of the watershed. So that is our time frame right now for the next update, is 5 years. But given some parameters that we're monitoring, if we were alerted to some sensitivities, we could look at bringing it back earlier in 3 to 4 years' time.
Okay, so So is there a detailed report? Is that the one you're talking about? Is it 500 pages or 5,000 pages, whatever it was?
Through the chair, the 500-page report contains detailed monitoring plans for each of the disciplines,
Right.
as well as frequency, type of monitoring, location, which has all been vetted and approved through both the Grand River and the region of Waterloo with the city as well.
Okay, and this report is with the staff right now?
I believe it's
Okay, so
posted.
if I want to take a look at it, I can just touch base with you later?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That's all the questions that we have. This has been moved by Councillor Ioannidis. Is there any comments? Councillor Ioannidis?
I'll just make a quick comment. I mean, I just want to thank staff and the efforts that they're putting forth to establish this baseline. I think it's rather important to the community and to us as well, as we know how the effects of development intensification around certain areas when they're sensitive. So I think it's a good initiative. Thank you.
Councillor Fernandez?
Yeah, I wasn't going to comment until I heard the last comment from Ms. Cooper about a 5-year time frame. And with some of the changes that are happening with intensification around the Upper Blair Creek watershed, I'm wondering if we maybe should be considering moving that up to a 3-year report, because I suspect we will see some changes, and whether that requires council direction, I'm not sure, but if it does, I'd like to hear from staff.
Through the chair, GRCA does system-wide monitoring for us on a yearly basis. So we get those monitoring requirements and we update the developers. That's what we're kind of tweaking the monitoring, so to speak, on an annual basis. It's just the overall state of the watershed update is to be done in 5 years' time. So it's not to say we'll go 5 years without looking at the results and where we're at. We get weekly, as Chris mentioned, we get weekly updates on the erosion and sediment control. So on top of the GRCA doing the system-wide annual monitoring for us, the developers, anyone else coming online, you spoke to concerns about intensification, any developers coming online have 3 requirements pre-construction development, post, and during construction as well, that they have to adhere to. So there's quite a few checkpoints in between. It's just in 5 years' time you'll see this large report in front of you again, but we're checking in as we go annually as well.
If something dramatic happens, would we see a report before this? Like this is quite an in-depth report, and I think that's why we're doing it every 5 years.
Are they notified?
Sorry, I didn't mean to start asking questions again.
If I may, through the chair. So certain parameters, certain monitoring programs have anything from weekly to 6-month to yearly reporting timeframes that the GRCA is reviewing. On an annual basis, the city and the GRCA meet with developers to reset the monitoring program as part of that adaptive management approach. So the approach is constantly changing, and it is permitted to change per the terms of the original study. So as we learn more, we refine the monitoring, and we refine what we're looking at in terms of if we're seeing a particular impact, then more focus may be put on that in the next subsequent monitoring year.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, there's no further comments, so I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. So those are all the items on the agenda. I did want to quickly bring to your attention the exciting news for the Huron Natural Area Permeable Paver Demonstration Project, which is complete, and I have parked on it, and it's great, and that the opening of that is happening on April 30th from 1 to 4. And then I just had a quick question around the unfinished business, only because we have time. I can ask that. There's a bunch of projects on there, one dating back as far as 2010, and then the other 3 are from 2013, and everything just keeps saying future CIS meeting. I wonder if we can just take a look at those, see if they're still relevant, and just report back on if they are proceeding, if they're not part of the work plan, maybe getting them in sometime sooner, or they've been there for a long time, so let's look at trying to see what we can do with them. And with that, Mayor Verbanovic probably wants to speak to the Pebble Creek Fairway Sims. No?
Well, that one can be taken off the...
That one's done?
Can be taken off the list. Both are done.
Okay, perfect. One down. So if staff can just look at that, just so that either we don't need this page or we need to get moving on those projects. With that, we are done. I don't know that you can start until 5. We're early. Does it say immediately following? You're going to probably want to come sit down here, though, aren't you? Because you're dealing with West. But you're dealing with just authorizing.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, I'll call the special council meeting to order. Motion to go in camera. Moved by Councillor Ioannidis, second by Councillor Schneider. All those. Councillor Gazzo, you have a question, or?
Didn't know you were going to do the camera. I question the necessity to deal with item number 2 in camera. No, the second item for the in-camera discussions. It's a question of whether we're going to sell something or we're going to lease it or...
Well, as Mr. Wilmer?
Through the mayor, yes, that's correct. It's there's options available as to sell or to lease, and so it's a matter of land disposition, and that's legitimately done in camera. As with is sometimes the case, though, if there's a need, depending on what direction staff are given, that can result in a report in public.
Okay. Any further questions? Sorry? Okay. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Motion to... Sorry? Yeah. Motion to recess. Moved by Councillor Marsh, second by Councillor Schneider. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. We're recessed until 6 o'clock.